Our next session is a book launch, Jinnah Alive by Yasser Latif Hamdani. Yasser Latif Hamdani will be in conversation with Dr. Syed Jaffar Ahmed.
Okay, first of all, I'll welcome Mr. Yasser Latif Hamdani, whose book we are going to discuss here. It's called Jinnah Alive. And of course, as the name suggests, it's about the political career of Mr. Jinnah. It's a biography. But before discussing this book, I would like to mention that Mr. Yasser Latif Hamdani is a historian and he is also a lawyer. So the printed introduction says that he is a well-known human rights barrister based in Pakistan. His most notable and successful legal case was getting YouTube unbanned in Pakistan. He's the author of Jinnah, Myth and Reality. This book was published in 2012. And he's member of the Honorable Society of Lincoln's Inn in London. Jinnah Alive is his third book, which has been published by Pakistan, in Pakistan by Lightstone Publishers. A very brief introduction was this. And this book is worth reading in the sense I have noted a number of merits of this book. I'm a student of history myself, and reading about Jinnah and about the high politics of India before partition and the event of the partition itself have been subjects of interest for me for years. I have also tried to keep track with the literature produced on this theme, and I read this book in the context of all what I have read before. I would say that this book may not be very exhaustive. It's not more than 300 and some certain pages, something like 390 pages. But it is exhaustive in the sense that it covers a lot of dimensions of Mr. Jinnah. Generally, we read about Jinnah's political struggle in the context of what was happening in India between Congress and the Muslim League, the manner in which he addressed the communal issue of India, what had been his strategy. Particularly, Aisha Jalal talks about the political strategy of Mr. Jinnah. We also have a number of official histories written both in India and Pakistan. But one thing that I would say singles out this book is the manner in which he has converged the political struggle of Mr. Jinnah and his personal life and his professional life. It's very rare. In fact, I must say that I haven't seen any work which would have shown how Jinnah's legal profession affected his politics and how his politics drew from his knowledge of law and constitutions. So that is something which Mr. Yasser has tried to do in his book. So first of all, I would say welcome to you. I would like you to explain to our audience what made you write this book. You had already written one book about Mr. Jinnah. So what was left in that which you tried to do in this book?
Am I audible? Okay, great. Yeah, the reason I wrote this book, and I, as you rightly point out, I had already written another book on Jinnah's politics, but this I wanted to write in terms of to get a holistic view of his life, because this is a question that I've, sort of grappled with all my life, as in all my adult life. When when I was a college student, I was studying abroad. One of the questions that came up as one would imagine, was why Pakistan? Why should there be a Pakistan? Why was there a Pakistan? Those of you who attended Barrister Etazaz Essence session earlier, so that's kind of the question that one is confronted with when one is studying abroad, where your very fundamental nature of your identity is challenged. So that's what led me to study Jinnah all those years. And Jinnah was like a journey. Learning about Jinnah was like a journey for me, because it also took me through other paths, right? The reason I became a lawyer later was because of Jinnah. The reason I went to Lincoln's Inn was Jinnah. So there was this proper obsession, people could call it an obsession that I had. But also, what I wanted to write in this book, I wanted to understand what it was that turned a person who was so passionately an Indian nationalist. And there was no Indian nationalist as passionate as Jinnah. What turned him towards becoming or turning into this apostle of separation? And was he indeed an apostle of separation? So that question was something that needed to be addressed in a holistic manner. And I think that's what I've tried to do with this book.
Right, that's good. I mean, it's a very objective book. And though he has used the word that he has been obsessed with Jinnah, but if you read this book, you will find out that he has been quite objective in treating Jinnah. For example, he says, and no Pakistani historian would say this thing, that in all the cases Jinnah fought, it was not always a success for him. He, as a lawyer, failed in different cases also. So that is one important thing that comes out in this book. Similarly, his explanation of relationship between Jinnah and Gandhi is also quite, I would say impressive from historical point of view. We generally think that they were both pitted against each other. They were rivals of extreme type. But he says that Deena Jinnah mentioned that Gandhi was quite full of praise for Mr. Jinnah. And he respected Jinnah. And I may mention, that's perhaps not mentioned in the book, but I have seen that on Gandhi's assassination, the next day, the statement that came from Governor General Quaid-e-Azam Mahmood Ali Jinnah, that is fascinating. One wouldn't have expected that type of statement today. So that tells that despite political differences and legal battle between two gentlemen and between their narratives, there was no personal animosity between them. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. I think there was a certain amount of bitterness that had come up over time, but there was no animosity. As a matter of fact, Deena Jinnah actually spoke about the fact that her father actually quite liked Gandhi. So there was no personal bitterness, but there was a clash of how they looked at the world. Gandhi was the thing with Gandhi was that he looked at the world from a very religious angle, and that is what defined his entire being. And while he's quite paradoxically considered the founder of what is a self-identified secular state, that is India, supposedly, but he himself was a very religious person, and he brought religion into politics. That is what the start or the break between Jinnah and Gandhi came on, was the fact that Gandhi brought religion into politics. And this was through his ahimsa, satyagraha, as well as his support of the Khilafat movement. People forget that it was Gandhi who supported the Khilafat movement. Jinnah actually opposed the Khilafat movement. So these are the kind of things that, so essentially the conflict between the two men was about philosophies towards politics. And it sounds paradoxical, but Jinnah was the one who's saying keep religion out of politics because it is going to denigrate both religion and politics. So that is sort of,
One good clarification he has made in the book is this, that generally it is thought that there was personal, differences between Gandhi and Jinnah. Gandhi had started calling him our Mohammedan friend rather than Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So that type of, addressals paved the way for separation between the two individuals. He says that actually the turning point came on the event of Khilafat movement. Jinnah was not at all convinced with the Khilafat objective, whereas Gandhi tried to make use of it for mobilizing the people, for reaching out to the people, and creating a niche for himself in Indian politics. So that is a very, I would say, pertinent observation made by him. And he has then come out with a number of supportive arguments in that respect. The politics of Maulana Muhammad Ali Jauhar and what Jinnah Sahab thought about him and his politics, etc., etc. Now, I would say that in Pakistan, we have created a number of Mr. Jinnahs. I have created a Jinnah of mine. The establishment has created a Jinnah of its own. The religious classes and the religious organizations have created their own Mr. Jinnah. But one good thing about this book is this, that he has not created a Jinnah of himself. He has tried to discover the actual Jinnah, which was a composite of different trends. He was a modernist in certain respects. He was also a traditionalist. He was someone who had great respect for his mother. And one point on which I would like you to explain in detail our audience, you say that 3 women have played very important role in the politics of Mr. Jinnah. Now these women have been discussed in Jinnah's biographies in terms of their personal relations with him. Jinnah's mother, his wife Dina, and his sister Fatma Jinnah. But he says that these 3 women had a great role to play in making what Mr. Jinnah became as a political leader. Would you explain
Yes,
it
of
further?
course. Yes, I think the influence of these women, I would say 4 women in this case. I wrote about 3, but there are 4 women. The mother, the wife, which is Rati Jinnah, the sister Fatima Jinnah, and Dina Jinnah, the daughter. They all had their role to play. Now, you've all heard the story where Jinnah goes to Lincoln's Inn and sees Prophet Muhammad's name. It's not actually the name, it's actually a fresco which has a representation of Prophet Muhammad there. And he sees that and he chooses Lincoln's Inn. Now that comes from his mother. His mother was a very religious person. And so that religious training that was inculcated in him by his mother makes him choose Lincoln's Inn because he sees it as a nod to his own heritage. Similarly, when his marriage with Rati Jinnah is still there, where she's still alive, Jinnah is very much the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. He's an Indian nationalist, just like, so Rati, even though she's much, much, much junior in terms of years, she has a very defining role in not just how Jinnah dresses, how he proceeds, how he goes to courts and stuff, all of these things, even, as far as, so if you recall some of the earlier photographs of Jinnah has a mustache. Jinnah has a mustache in them. So that mustache was actually done away with because Rati wanted it done away with. So it's kind of that kind of influence that she had on his personal style, on his personal choices, as well as his political choices. You see the famous 1918 protest that Jinnah led, and I write about it in the book in detail, against Lord Wellington. That particular protest happened because of Rati. So the thing is, it's a question. I leave that question open. If Rati had lived, would Jinnah have chosen his path, and would Jinnah have gone the Pakistan route? I don't know. I think that is a question that, obviously it's a what if. So you can't really answer it. But I feel that Rati had such a fundamental influence that maybe he wouldn't have chosen to go the Pakistan route. Similarly, Fatma Jinnah, I think Fatma Jinnah's contribution to Jinnah's life was extraordinary. She stood with him throughout his life and was basically his confidant. There was no other confidant, and he discussed everything with her. And the influence that Fatma Jinnah had in terms of defining, in terms of his. So, for example, it is his sister that he would take along everywhere to make a point to the Muslims that you have to take your women side by side you. That's his famous quote. Any nation that can take women side by side you will not rise to the heights of glory. No nation can rise to the heights of glory if your women are not side by side you. That's a very famous quote from Jinnah. So he did that practically. He took Fatma Jinnah along everywhere. And finally, his daughter, Dina, he was very fond of her. There was obviously this tension that arose out of Dina's wedding, Dina's marriage outside the faith, as it were, um, both for political reasons as well as other reasons. Jinnah did not approve of that, but he did not disown her, contrary to what is taught in our schools. He didn't disown her, but he obviously didn't approve of it. So I think all of these four women had their own role and part to play in his life, and without them, Mr. Jinnah would not have been the person he was.
Right. Thank you very much. I mean, this point about, the four women who played important role in his political life is important, but one point which deserves more, I would say, discussion and attention is what you have written in your book, that with Rati Jinnah's death, Jinnah's grounding in the Indian nationalist, politics, in a way weakened. And one can see that 1928 was the year when Rati Jinnah died. And from 1928 onwards, we see what type of politics Mr. Jinnah was doing. He was giving different constitutional suggestions and proposals. And after a few years, by 1936-37, he was talking about two-nation theory and all that. So, I mean, is the death of Rati Jinnah really that important in shifting the politics of Mr. Jinnah?
I think she was an extraordinary influence on him. And that's why I said that perhaps had she lived, things would have been different. He was very bitter he was embittered by the death of Rati Jinnah, but there were other things that happened side by side. Some of his very reasonable proposals, like, for example, the Delhi proposals that he made, or even the 14 points later, these positions were outrightly rejected by the Congress party. So his bitterness in his personal life, because the last few years of Rati Jinnah with Jinnah were rather tragic, and she went through a lot of issues, and they went through a lot of issues in the marriage. So there was that, and then that bitterness was also it also coincided with the bitterness Jinnah had with the Congress party. So that kind of took away his nationalism was slowly eroding, and we see, as you said, we see that it was he was moving away consistently from his role as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity, as this great uniter of Hindus and Muslims, as the bridge between Congress and the official party. All of these things he was actually slowly but steadily abandoning and assuming a role of more of an advocate or a sole spokesman of Muslims. And that is where we see after 1935-36 and after the Lucknow session of 1937, that's where the story goes. And that again coincides with Fatma Jinnah's role. Fatma Jinnah actually is a supporter of Jinnah's endeavors as a Muslim. Because Fatma Jinnah herself was a very practicing Muslim. So she is obviously someone who's very concerned about the fate of the Muslims, and she does actually play a part in terms of convincing Jinnah, in my opinion, from what I've read.
Okay, Mr. Yasser, at this point, I think it wouldn't be inappropriate if I sort of ask you that, Jinnah and Rati, they were involved in a love affair, and there was a difference of age. I mean, Jinnah was 42, I think, and she was 18 years old. They got married. Jinnah was intensely involved with her. As you say that he removed his mustache on the request of Rati Jinnah. Other historians have narrated other very interesting stories. Then how come this association turned into a Greek tragedy, and by 1926-27 they were almost separated?
I think Rati was, from what one can gather in terms of the books that have been written on her, and there have been some very fine books, what one can gather is that she was actually a very sensitive soul. And I think as you said, the age difference was enormous. I mean, we're talking 24 years. That's a huge age difference even for that time. So I think Jinnah could not give her the attention that she deserved. And this was something that Jinnah saw as his own personal failing. So that bitterness actually came from that as well. So I think that in this case, I think Jinnah did at one point take responsibility, and he said that she was much younger, I shouldn't have married her. So that's what, she was just a child, I shouldn't have married her. So that I think the bitterness or the separation itself came from the fact that Rati was a very sensitive soul, very she was also someone who was aesthetically and culturally in that milieu where she would, she was also known as sort of the life of the party. She was very outgoing, very extrovert, and Jinnah's personality was somewhat opposite of that. So that is what...
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just ask one more question, then I'll open the floor for the audience, and there are a number of students sitting here, and they have come to ask questions from you. My final question is with respect to Jinnah's vision of Pakistan. You have clearly mentioned that Jinnah didn't want a theocratic state. He was a modernist. He was someone who believed in Western liberal political ideas. But then what happened? I mean, why this turnaround, and we moved in a very opposite direction?
I think one of the things that happened after Jinnah passed was that the leadership that came afterwards, including the great Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan, they didn't have enough of the roots in Pakistan to actually withstand, so they had to make compromises. I think the first such compromise was the Objectives Resolution. That sort of gave theocracy a foot in the door, where it kind of became inevitable that the state would, because you needed someone like Jinnah to explain this nuance, right? After all, what did it mean that Pakistan was created in the name of Islam? Was it created in the name of Islam? What did it being created in the name of Islam mean? Did he mean that it would be a theocratic state? Absolutely not. He was absolutely opposed to a theocratic state. If you look at his speeches, there are about 33 speeches where he talks about inclusive Pakistan, a Pakistan that gives equal rights to its minorities, a Pakistan that is not exclusive at all. It's an inclusive democratic republic. Now, did he refer to Islam at points? Few and far between he did. And he always said that Islamic principles that are democracy and equality of mankind are applicable as they were 1400 years ago. So his entire emphasis, the crux of what he was saying was that the modern democracy that you see, the sort of the modern liberal democratic framework, it is in complete consonance with Islam. It's not in contradiction to Islam. So you should adopt it wholeheartedly without worrying about the fact that it's, because, and if you read the 11th August speech and everyone talks about that, that's not the only speech he spoke about, such an inclusive state. There are several other speeches. But that speech was very clear in the sense that he spoke as the founding father of a new nation, spoke to the Constituent Assembly, which was about to frame the constitution. And he said all of these things. He said that Pakistan, that religion, in due course of time, Hindus will cease to be Hindus and Muslims will cease to be Muslims, not in a religious sense, because that is the personal faith of an individual, but in a political sense as citizens of one state. So that question comes. Now, so he was very clear. He wanted, and now I've been speaking about this. There are two terms. We always, things get lost in translation. There's a term, there's secular, and then there's secularist. So an example of a secularist state would be France, which wants to completely drive religion out of the public sphere. An example of a secular state would be England or the United Kingdom, where religion has a legitimate role to play in public life, but it is still considered a personal business of the individual. And it is not there to, there's no distinction between citizens on the basis of religion. So there is a state impartiality. So Jinnah wanted a secular state, not a secular state. The confusion that is created always is when these two words are conflated. These two words are not the same, these two ideas are not the same.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, in the book, there are a number of things which come as good information for us. I mean, for example, he says that Jinnah had simply rejected the idea of pan-Islamism. He talks about parliamentary democracy and presidential form of government, etc., etc. But I'll not build on these things. I'll open the floor for the audience, and I'll request you to put your question very briefly. Don't make a comment, rather a question would be appreciated. Yes, ma'am. And is there any mic available here? Please try to be very brief. It's not... आप खोल के दें.
Hello.
My question is, if Jinnah wanted a secular state, what was his opinion, or how did he envision Sharia law as being practiced in Pakistan? Because once you have Sharia law, it can't be a secular state. So I'm just interested in to know what was his idea of how the legal framework of Pakistan would come about.
I think in terms of, okay, so there's this very famous incident. Raja of Mahmudabad was a very close friend of Jinnah's and a colleague. Now, Raja of Mahmudabad said in one of his meetings with Jinnah, and this was right after the Lahore Resolution was passed in 1940, he said that Pakistan is, of course, going to be an Islamic state. And Jinnah said, have you lost your mind? Because there are 70 odd sects in Islam. Which Sharia are you going to follow? So his answer throughout was, when somebody asked him about Sharia, he's like, which one? Which one are you going to follow? It's a divisive issue. Don't make it a sectarian issue. But
Right.
what he did say at certain points was that a modern democracy is not against Sharia. It's not, a modern secular democracy is not something that God forbids. So he was clear about that. The other thing is that as far as Shariat is concerned, he did speak about personal law, for example. So if you're going to ask the question about personal law, yes, personal law, just like India has Muslim personal law, he didn't have anything against Muslim personal law being applied to Muslims, and so on and so forth, to other communities, other Muslim laws. So as far as your question is concerned, I don't think Jinnah wanted an imposition of Sharia in the country. I think he believed very strongly that religion was a personal matter and that it should be kept a personal matter.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Sir,
अच्छा माइक आपके पास है, चलिए ब्रीफ क्वेश्चन करें.
Sir, जैसे कि we are know very well, lots of the books there is mention according to the Chaudhry Zahid Saab. He wrote history of the Pakistan. He mentioned clearly the Qaid-e-Azam was a secular, and he was wanted to the Pakistan as an independent state, as a secular state. So, but I think you, which mentioned resemblance, you gave the resemblance between the United Kingdom and the Pakistan. I not got as a properly. I think you are totally opposite your views according to the Qaid-e-Azam. So please explain
नहीं,
it
excuse
properly.
me, आपने समझा नहीं. You have not understood. He's not saying what you are ascribing to him. I mean, he's saying that Jinnah believed in secularism, and British model was a secular model, and he wanted to have Pakistan, something like that. Okay. आपका सवाल. And you can ask the question in Urdu also. इसे ऑन करो. Yes.
Okay. Is this working now? Oh, okay. So I wanted to ask that what is his take on the language controversy that happened in 1948? And he especially went to Dhaka and he declared that Urdu will be the national language, even though the 7% of the population
Okay,
spoke Urdu.
right.
So
what
the
is
national
defense?
language question, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, but you're talking about the Urdu as the...
Urdu
okay.
and Bengali
Urdu
issue,
and
and
Bengali
he
issue.
went to Dhaka and he said that Urdu and Urdu alone will be the national language of Pakistan.
Right. I think, first of all, I would like to talk about the fact that Jinnah actually used the word state language, not national language. And I think he drew that distinction. He said in East Pakistan, he went and he said, Bengali can be your provincial language. However, the state language of Pakistan shall be Urdu and Urdu alone. That's what he said. Now, I think, you know, the way it came out, the way it was twisted, the way it was used, I think it was in terms of, it was kind of a political blunder. But in terms of what Jinnah was saying, no matter how it was colored, was that as lingua franca, Urdu was the only suitable language. It was understood in Dhaka, it was understood in Karachi, it was contrary to what we say, only 7% of Pakistan's population, etc., etc. But the fact is that it is the lingua franca, it is still the lingua franca, it was the lingua franca even, and it's not just the lingua franca of Pakistan as it was in 1947, it was, Urdu was spoken right from, or understood right from Peshawar to Calcutta. Calcutta still has its own, or even further. So the thing is that it was lingua franca of all of North India. So I see that in that sense. I think it was a mistake on Jinnah's part because it was misused. And it created a gulf between the East Wing and the West Wing. But what Jinnah meant, that I think needs to be clarified.
That's right. I mean, I'll slightly differ with Yasser Saab. I would say that, I mean, Jinnah was a constitutionalist. He knew the connotation of words he was using. So to say that it would be state language did mean that it would be the national official language of Pakistan. And I would say that he should have been knowledgeable about the fact that in certain countries, more than one language are adopted as the official languages. So there was no, it wouldn't have been wrong if Bengali would have been adopted as another national or official language of Pakistan. But you know, these are the things which are open for discussion. Another question. Yes, पीछे से एक हाथ उठा, जोर से बोलिए ताकि आपकी आवाज़ आ जाए. Yeah, all the students of IBA actually.
जनाब
भाई अब ये नहीं, एक मिनट प्लीज़, थोड़ा सा आपको डिसिप्लिन फॉलो करना होगा. वैसे भी ये जिन्ना साहब का सेशन चल रहा है. मैंने उनसे कहा है सेंड द माइक टू देम.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम. मेरा सवाल ये है कि जो फर्स्ट फॉरेन मिनिस्टर थे सर ज़फ़रुल्लाह ख़ान साहब, उनके मुतलिक और जो फर्स्ट मिनिस्टर ऑफ लॉ थे सर जोगिंद्र नाथ मंडल, उनके मुतलिक जिन्ना की क्या राय थी? क्योंकि वो भी ऐसी कम्युनिटीज़ से थे जिनको अब परसिक्यूशन किए जा रहे हैं जिनके बाद.
بالکل صحیح. آئی تھنک ظفر اللہ خان کی جو کنٹریبیوشنز ہیں پاکستان کے لیے, اس سے پہلے مسلمانوں کے لیے, اور ایون جو متحدہ ہندوستان تھا اس کے لیے, اور قائد اعظم کی اپنی ان کے بارے میں جو رائے تھی وہ بہت اچھی تھی. اسی لیے انہوں نے فارن منسٹر بنایا. ان کے بارے میں کئی خطوط لکھے قائد اعظم نے مختلف لوگوں کو کہ ان کو میرے ساتھ میرے پاس بھیجیں. بھوپال کے نواب کو انہوں نے بھیجیں کیونکہ ان کے پاس یہ کمیٹڈ تھے. تو سر ظفر اللہ خان کے ساتھ تو ان کے بہت اچھے تعلقات تھے. اور ظفر اللہ, اور اس میں یہ مسئلہ جو ہے یہ بڑا سیریس پاکستان میں ان کی جس کمیونٹی سے وہ ہیں, احمدیہ کمیونٹی, اس کے ساتھ جو ہم اس ملک میں کرتے ہیں, اٹس ایبسلیوٹلی اے شیم جو ہم اس ملک میں کرتے ہیں. لیکن جناح صاحب کا تو یہ ماننا تھا, اور یہ چیز کو اتنی پاپولر نہیں ہے آج کہنا 74 کے بعد سے. جناح صاحب کا یہ ماننا تھا کہ اگر ایکس وائی زی اپنے آپ کو مسلمان یا کرسچن یا کچھ کہتا ہے تو اس کی بات اسی طرح مان لو, اس کو یہ نہ کہو کہ تم یہ بات کرو گے تو تم ہوگے. تو ایک تو قائد اعظم کا 24 مئی 1944 میں بڑی کلیئر بات کر دی تھی انہوں نے. تو جہاں تک پرسیکیوشن کا تعلق ہے احمدیوں کے ساتھ جو انفارچونیٹلی اس ملک میں ہوتا ہے, اس کو شاید قائد اعظم جو ہیں بہت اس چیز سے نالاں ہوتے. اچھا, جہاں تک تعلق ہے جوگندر ناتھ منڈل کا, ان کے اسکیجول کاسٹ ہندو تھے, وہ ان کو لاء منسٹر لگایا گیا. یہ لوگ بھول جاتے ہیں کہ لاء منسٹر لگنے سے پہلے بھی ان کو مسلمان سیٹ پہ, not on a Hindu seat but on a Muslim seat, he was made the Minister of Labour in the interim cabinet of India 1946 میں. تو ان کے اوپر, اور یہ قائد اعظم نے ان کو کیا تھا. he was nominated by Mr. Jinnah himself. So the thing is کہ جوگندر ناتھ منڈل also presided over the very first session of the Constituent Assembly. So he again was someone who was a long-term ally of Jinnah, and unfortunately someone we treated very shabbily after Jinnah died. اور اس بات کو بھی ہمیں ماننا پڑے گا کہ 1950 میں انہوں نے ریزائن کر کے وہ واپس ہندوستان چلے گئے, اور اٹ واز اے ٹریجڈی. لیکن بہرحال یہ ہماری جو تھیوکریٹائزیشن ہے اس کو کسی پوائنٹ پہ ہمیں ریورس کرنا پڑے گا. جیسے کہ میری ایک ہو رہی تھی ایک ریڈر سے بات, پاکستان ہیز ٹو گو بیک ٹو دا بیسز. جناح کی جو 11 اگست کی تقریر ہے, اور جناح کی جو وہ 33 تقریریں ہیں جن کا میں نے ذکر کیا جہاں یہ اسپوکن اباؤٹ مائنورٹیز, وہ ساری کی ساری ہمیں لانی پڑیں گی. تبھی پاکستان ایک انکلوسیو اور ایک ڈیموکریٹک اور ایک ملٹی کلچرل سوسائٹی کے طور پہ اٹھ سکے گا. اور یہ صرف باقی غیر مسلموں کی بات نہیں ہے, یہ مسلمانوں کے اپنے لیے بھی اچھا ہے, کیونکہ آپ ایک قسم کے مسلمان نہیں. یہ بھی 11 اگست کی تقریر میں قائد اعظم نے کہا کہ کئی فرقے ہیں آپ کے, تو کس کس کو آپ کافر ڈکلیئر کریں گے. یہ والا مسئلہ جو ہے یہ بہت ضروری ہے, اور اس کو یہ صرف قائد اعظم کا ویژن ہی ہمیں اس سے نکال سکتا ہے.
ایک چیز میں اور آپ کو ذرا سا بتاؤں کہ جہاں تک جوگندر ناتھ منڈل کا تعلق ہے, جب انٹرم گورنمنٹ بنی اور کانگریس نے اپنے منسٹرز کے نام دیے تو اس میں ابوالکلام آزاد کا نام تھا. تو جناح صاحب نے کہا کہ نہیں, آپ کسی مسلمان کا نام نہیں دے سکتے. تو کانگریس نے کہا کہ بھئی ہماری سیٹس ہیں 5 یا 6, جو بھی ہمارے وزیر ہیں ہم کسی کو بھی بنائیں. جناح صاحب نے کہا کہ نہیں, ہم کسی مسلمان کو کانگریس کی طرف سے نہیں آنے دیں گے. تو انہوں نے کمپرومائز کیا, انہوں نے ابوالکلام آزاد کا نام واپس لے لیا. پھر جب کہا گیا مسلم لیگ سے کہ آپ اپنے 5 نام دیں, تو انہوں نے جوگندر ناتھ منڈل کا نام بھی دیا. تو انہوں نے کہا اب آپ کیوں کسی ایک ہندو کا نام دے رہے ہیں؟ تو انہوں نے کہا کہ 2 نیشن تھیوری پہ ہم بلیو کرتے ہیں, آپ نہیں کرتے. تو جناح صاحب کی تو بڑی دلچسپ آرگومنٹس تھیں, وہ دوسرے کو چپ کرانے کے طریقے. اور پھر جو کانسٹیٹیوئنٹ اسمبلی کا پہلا سیشن ہوا اس کو پریزائڈ منڈل نے کیا. پھر پاکستان کی فرسٹ کابینہ جو قائد اعظم کی ہینڈ پکڈ کابینہ تھی, اس میں انہیں لاء منسٹر بنایا. اور اگر قائد اعظم زندہ رہتے اور پاکستان کا دس سو کالڈ اسلامک اسٹیٹ کا کانسٹیٹیوشن پارلیمنٹ میں کانسٹیٹیوئنٹ اسمبلی میں پیش ہوتا تو لاء منسٹر ہی پیش کر رہے ہوتے. دیز آر دا فیکٹس. ایک اور چلتے چلتے آپ کو بات بتاؤں کہ 13 ستمبر کو قائد اعظم کی ڈیتھ ہوئی, 14 ستمبر کو ان کا فیونرل ہوا. 15 اگست کا ڈان اخبار نکال کے دیکھیں, اس میں ہیڈنگ کے نیچے جو سب ہیڈنگ ہے وہ یہ کہ قائد اعظم کے جنازے کو ان لوگوں نے کندھا دیا, اور قائد اعظم کے جنازے کو کندھا دینے والوں میں منڈل صاحب بھی شامل تھے. سو دیٹ واز اے ڈفرینٹ ورلڈ. پاکستان جس طرح کا سوچا گیا تھا، جناح صاحب نے جو پاکستان سوچا تھا وہ پاکستان نہیں تھا جو انفارچونیٹلی بعد میں بنا. جی پلیز آپ کا سوال. آپ کا جی مائک. اچھا آئی ایم سوری پہلے آپ کر لیجیے پلیز، لیکن سوال کیجیے گا.
میرے سوال سے پہلے کافی جواب تو آپ نے دے دیا ہے، پھر بھی میں سوال
تو
کرنا
پھر
چاہتا ہوں. سوال ایک
پھر بھی ہے
کہ ہم جس ملک پاکستان میں جس ملک میں رہ رہے ہیں وہ جناح والا تھاٹ والا پاکستان اس کو کہہ سکتے ہیں یا نہیں؟
بس اس کے جواب تو ہو گیا نا. چلیے
نہیں کہہ سکتے.
تو آپ پلیز مائک ادھر لے آئیں.
Yasser Saab, don't you think Jinnah Saab was denied his own political evolution by his early death? That
By?
he may have, by his early death, because he would have maybe responded pragmatically to many, many contradictions that the state of Pakistan is beset with, had he lived through those contradictions in the years to come.
Yeah, I've actually thought about this a while, sort of, because I think that would have been a very... So what if the objectives resolution had come up during Jinnah's time? What would his reaction would be? Would his reaction be to something like that? I feel that even in Jinnah's time, you had these exigencies of politics coming up now and then. So, for example, we spoke about the Ahmadi issue. That was something that came up during Jinnah's... There were religious people who wanted Jinnah to turn the Ahmadis out of the Muslim League. He refused. He said, no, I can't. So that sort of thing. So in terms of pragmatism, from what I gather, is whether he would have sort of appeased a certain... So at least in his lifetime, he did not appease
Let's
the
take
orthodoxy.
another question. اور یس چلیے جلدی مائک پلیز ادھر پہنچائیں. بریف کوشچن.
السلام علیکم. ایک سوال یہ ہے کہ ڈیورنگ موومنٹ آف پاکستان بیفور ایگزسٹنس آف پاکستان ہم نے ایک نعرہ سنا تھا، پاکستان کا مطلب کیا، لا الہ الا اللہ. کیا قائد اعظم نے اس کو اپوز کیا؟ کیونکہ قائد اعظم تو پاکستان بننے کے 1 سال بعد تک بھی حیات رہے. تھینک یو.
جی آئی تھنک آئی ریٹن اباؤٹ دس ان دا بک. خالق دینا ہال ہے کراچی میں. یہاں 17 دسمبر یا 16 دسمبر کی دن جو تھا یہ ایک تقریب ہوئی تھی جس میں مسلم لیگ جو تھی، آل انڈیا مسلم لیگ، اس کا آخری اجلاس تھا. وہ یہیں ہوا تھا 17 دسمبر 1947 کو. اس دن وہاں ایک صاحب تھے جنہوں نے یہ مسئلہ اٹھایا. انہوں نے کہا ہم نے تو اپنے ووٹرز کو کہا ہے پاکستان کا مطلب کیا، لا الہ الا اللہ. تو جناح صاحب نے سیدھا کہا، انہوں نے کہا میں نے تو کبھی ایسا ریزولوشن پاس نہیں کیا اور میں نے کبھی یہ سلوگن آپ کو دیا نہیں ہے. آپ نے دیا ہوگا، آپ نے یوز کیا ہوگا ووٹ لینے کے لیے، لیکن ایز فار ایز آئی ایم کنسرنڈ آئی ہیو نتھنگ ٹو ڈو ود دس سلوگن. سو یہ جناح صاحب نے میڈ اٹ ویری کلیئر.
تھینک یو. نیکسٹ. نہیں پلیز نو کراس کوشچننگ
فرام مائی سائڈ.
جی مائک ادھر دے آپ کے پاس ہے. بریف پلیز.
اوکے ویری بریف. لیکن ساری جتنی باتیں ہوئی ہیں یہاں، اب وہ کسی خاص ریفرنس سے ہوئی ہے، خاص فریم میں ہوئی ہے. تو لکم دینکم ولی دین ہماری قرآن کریم میں اس کی تعلیم ہے، اس کے حوالے ہونا چاہیے کہ ہمارے یہاں انکلوسیو جو ہے وہ ہے، جمہوریت ہے، ساری چیزیں ہیں. اس کو ریلیٹ کر کے آپ کچھ کہتے ہیں تو ایک طبقہ خاص ہے جو انداز میں سوچتا ہے، ان کو بھی کچھ اطمینان ہو کہ ہم جہاں سے باتیں کر رہے ہیں، جو قائد اعظم نے باتیں کی ہیں وہ کتنی ریفرل ہے. یہ میرا سوال ہے.
جی اچھا، دیٹ از پریسائسلی واٹ آئی واز سیئنگ کہ جو ہے یہی جو آبجیکٹیو تھا قائد اعظم کا. انہوں نے بار جگہ پہ یہ کہا کہ جو چیزیں میں کہہ رہا ہوں، انکلوسیو اسٹیٹ کی، لوگوں کے مذہب کو جو ہے رسپیکٹ کرنے کی، اسٹیٹ کی امپارشیلٹی کی، یہ ساری جو ہیں چیزیں یہ اسلام سے متصادم نہیں ہیں. تو یہ چیز جو ہے یہ تو بڑی انہوں نے کلیئر کی ہے جگہ جگہ پہ. تو وہ آپ جو کہہ رہے ہیں بالکل صحیح کہہ رہے ہیں. آئی تھنک اسلام سے تو بالکل متصادم نہیں ہے یہ چیزیں.
اینی ادر کوشچن؟ یہ اتنے سارے جو اسٹوڈنٹس بیٹھے ہیں کیوں نہیں سوال کر رہے؟
I have a mic.
جی
سر میرا ایک کوشچن ہے جیسے ریگارڈنگ جناح صاحب ڈریسنگ بیسک میں اسٹارٹنگ میں وہ دے ویئرنگ اے ویری کلاسی سوٹ اور ہم نے انہیں دیکھا ہے پھر بعد میں ٹرن اراؤنڈ ہوا اور شیروانی ہوا تو اس پہ آپ کی کیا فیڈ بیک؟
دیکھیں شیروانی تو انہوں نے 1937 کے بعد جو ہے اور 1937 نہیں 1940 کے بعد آفیشیل پبلک سیریمنیز میں پہننی شروع کر دی بٹ ہی ڈنٹ گیو اپ ہز سوٹس. آپ اگر 46 47 میں بھی دیکھیں تو 46 کی اور کیبنٹ مشن پلان میں سو ہیز ان کی جو پبلک پکچرز ہیں وہ ساری کی ساری سوٹس میں ہیں. سو آئی ڈونٹ تھنک کہ اتنا ڈراسٹک تھا کہ انہوں نے بس ایک دن اٹھ کے کہا کہ میں اب جو صرف شیروانی پہنوں گا, یہ نہیں تھا. لیکن یہ ضرور ہے کہ انہوں نے پبلک میٹنگز کے لیے 1938 1937 کے بعد سے شیروانی پہننا شروع کر دی تھی.
کوئی اور اسٹوڈنٹ سوال کرے گا؟ جی آپ کیجیے, اسٹینڈ اپ.
السلام علیکم. مائی کوشچن از دیٹ کہ قائد اعظم محمد علی جناح تھے, آفٹر کانگریس انہوں نے برٹش اورینٹل پارٹی جوائن کی اینڈ دین اس کے بعد پھر انہوں نے مسلم لیگ جوائن کیا. تو ایک طبقہ خاص ہے جو یہ کہتا ہے یا یہ سوچتا ہے کہ انہوں نے مسلم لیگ جوائن کرنے سے پہلے ایک ڈیمانڈ رکھی تھی کہ آپ مجھے پریزیڈنٹ بنائیں, دین آئی ول جوائن مسلم لیگ. تو اس بات میں کتنی صداقت ہے؟
نہیں, یہ بالکل اس میں کوئی صداقت نہیں ہے, نہ کوئی ایسی پارٹی تھی. یہ پہلی دفعہ میں سن رہا ہوں اس بات کو. 1913 میں قائد اعظم نے مسلم لیگ جوائن کی تھی, کانگریس کے وہ پہلے ممبر تھے, کانگریس چھوڑی نہیں تھی انہوں نے. 1913 میں جو ان کی جو پارٹی جب جوائن کی تو اس سے پہلے جو انہوں نے شرط رکھی تھی وہ شرط یہ نہیں تھی کہ مجھے صدر بنایا جائے. انہوں نے کہا تھا کہ آپ یہ شرط یہ ہے کہ آپ سیلف گورنمنٹ کا ڈیمانڈ کریں کہ ہم انگریزوں سے سیلف گورنمنٹ چاہتے ہیں. اس سے پہلے مسلم لیگ سیلف گورنمنٹ کی ڈیمانڈ نہیں کرتی تھی. تو جب یہ ہوا تو اس کے بعد جب مسلم لیگ نے اپنی کریڈ چینج کی, یعنی کہ اپنا مینیفیسٹو ہی چینج کیا کہ ہم سیلف گورنمنٹ چاہتے ہیں انگریزوں سے, تب قائد اعظم نے مسلم لیگ کو جوائن کیا تھا. اور اس وقت بھی انہوں نے یہ شرط رکھی تھی کہ یہ میری جو لارجر کمٹمنٹ ہے, نیشنل کمٹمنٹ ہے انڈیا کے ساتھ, یہ اس کے اوپر حاوی نہیں آئے گی تو تبھی میں جوائن کر رہا ہوں مسلم لیگ.
صحیح. بھائی آپ بچوں کو کر لینے دیں سوال. جی آپ اسٹینڈ اپ پلیز.
السلام علیکم. We are talking about Pakistan and we refer to the East Pakistan. I am concerned to know that why Jinnah was so lenient towards West Pakistan issue? Like it is also one of the portions.
Say
lenient towards, you said.
Huh.
As in how was he lenient? Sorry.
Like I believe he could have come up with some reforms or constitutions that now it should not be named Bangladesh, it should be a part of us.
چلیں میں ان کے سوال کو تھوڑا سا اور بنا دوں کہ انہوں نے ڈھاکہ کو کیپٹل کیوں نہیں بنایا, کراچی کو کیوں بنایا.
This is a very good question. I think اس میں one of the things that I should point out is that 1947 کے مئی میں there was a proposal that was given by Sarat Chandra Bose and Hussain Shahid Sohrawardi. اور یہ بڑا انٹرسٹنگ چیز ہے جس کو اکثر ہسٹورینز جو ہیں وہ جو ہے اس کے اوپر گلاس اوور کر دیتے ہیں. وہ یہ تھا کہ انہوں نے یہ پروپوزل دیا کہ بنگال کو ہم ڈیوائڈ نہیں کرتے, بنگال کو ایک آزاد ریاست بنا دیتے ہیں, این انڈیپینڈنٹ بنگال. جناح صاحب نے ایکچولی اس ڈیمانڈ کو ایکسیپٹ کر لیا تھا. سو یہ کویسچن کہ وہ کس طرح چاہے کہ لاہور ریزولوشن جو ہے وہ بڑا ایمبیگوس ڈاکیومنٹ ہے. اگر آپ اس چیز پہ دیکھیں اس میں اسٹیٹس کا ذکر ہے, جس کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ ایک بھی ہو سکتی تھی اور دو ریاستیں بھی ہو سکتی تھیں. تو جہاں تک تعلق ہے وہ اس چیز کا, تو آئی تھنک لینینٹ ان ٹرمز آف ویسٹ پاکستان کے ساتھ. آئی تھنک ایک تو بڑی کلیئر چیز جو مجھے اپنی ریسرچ سے ملتی ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ قائد اعظم جو تھے ہی وانٹیڈ الٹیمیٹلی ٹو موو بیک ٹو بامبے, اور وہ چاہتے تھے کہ سہارا دے لیں پچھلے چند پہلے سالوں میں پاکستان کو, اس کے بعد پاکستانی اپنے ڈیسیجنز خود لیں. اب کراچی کو جو چوز کیا گیا تھا, کراچی اس لیے چوز کیا گیا فرام واٹ آئی کوڈ گیدر واز دیٹ اٹ واز دا موسٹ سوٹیبل پلیس, کیونکہ باقی جگہ جو تھیں وہ ڈھاکہ جو تھا واز ٹو کلوز ٹو دا ایسٹرن. ڈھاکہ اور لاہور جو تھے دے ور ناٹ کنسیڈرڈ آئیڈیل فار کیپٹل سٹیز. کلکٹا اگر ہوتا بنگال میں, جو کہ کلکٹا کی ڈیمانڈ کی تھی ایک زمانے میں قائد اعظم نے, اگر کلکٹا ایسٹ پاکستان میں ہوتا تو شاید کلکٹا کو کنسیڈر کیا جاتا.
رائٹ. اور کوئی اسٹوڈنٹ, شیل آئی نیم دے اسٹوڈنٹس؟ اب اگر آپ نہیں کریں گے تو میں نام لینا شروع کروں گا. اگلا سوال نبیہہ کریں گی, آپ بولیں. یس.
میرا کوشچن یہ ہے, پاکستان کی انڈیپینڈنس موومنٹ میں اسپیشلی 1940 ریزولوشن میں سر جی ایم سید کا کیا رول تھا؟ اگر کوئی رول تھا تو اتنا ہائی لائٹ کیوں نہیں ہے؟
کس کا؟
جی ایم سید کا.
جی ایم سید.
جی آئی تھنک یہ بھی ایک چیز ہے جو آئی ہیو ریٹن اباؤٹ. جی ایم سید صاحب واز ویری امپورٹنٹ رول, ہیڈ اے ویری امپورٹنٹ رول ان دا میکنگ آف پاکستان. یہ لوگ بھول جاتے بیکاز آف لیٹر ایشوز دیٹ کیم اباؤٹ آبویسلی. لیکن 1938 میں جو فرسٹ ریزولوشن تھا, اور جو مسلم لیگ کی اسمبلی پارٹی تھی, پارلیمنٹری پارٹی سندھ میں, پاکستان کا ریزولوشن تو اوریجنلی وہاں سے ہوا تھا. سو آئی تھنک جی ایم سید, آپ ان کی اگر کتاب پڑھیں تو اس میں بڑا کلیئرلی نظر آتا ہے. اس میں یہ تھا, ان کی کچھ اختلافات تھے, قائد اعظم سے بھی تھے اور لوگوں سے بھی تھے. وہ چاہتے تھے, شاید ان کا کچھ یہ کنسرن تھا کہ شاید جو ہے ان کی جو سندھی آئیڈینٹی ہے وہ اوور ویلم نہ ہو جائے. تو وہ ان کے کنسرنس تھے, تو ان کو ایک طرح سے اینٹا اسٹیٹ دیکھا گیا اس کے بعد. اور وہ ریاست جو ہے اس کے لیے وہ ایک, ان کے لیے ریاست کے لیے وہ ایک انکمفرٹیبل پریزنس بن گیا, جس کی وجہ سے ان کو اتنا کریڈٹ نہیں دیا گیا. لیکن ان کا ایک رول ہے, چاہے ان کا کئی جگہ پہ اختلاف ہے, لیکن ان کا ایک رول ہے جو ریکگنائز ہونا چاہیے.
دیکھیں 1940s میں جی ایم سید کا کوئی ایشو نہیں تھا. بیسیکلی جو اختلافات ہوئے وہ 1945-46 کے الیکشنز کے وقت ہوئے. جی ایم سید جو ہیں سندھ کی مسلم لیگ کے پریزیڈنٹ تھے. ان کا بڑا جائز موقف تھا کہ سندھ میں جو ٹکٹ دیے جائیں وہ اس میں ان کی مرضی شامل ہو. لیکن سندھ کی جو انٹرنل پالیٹکس تھی اس میں جناح صاحب نے مختلف گروپوں کو بیلنس کرنے کی کوشش کی, اور اس کی یہ قیمت پھر پے کرنی پڑی کہ جی ایم سید جو ہیں وہ ناراض ہوئے. تو میرا خیال ہے کہ جی ایم سید کا سندھ کی بیداری میں اور رائٹ فرام دا بگننگ ان کا بہت پازیٹیو کنٹریبیوشن ہے, جسے ہسٹورینس کو ریکگنائز کرنا چاہیے. اینی ادر کویسچن؟ ہوا کوئی سوال آپ لوگوں کا؟ اگر کوئی اسٹوڈنٹ پوچھے تو بہت اچھی بات ہے, آپ پیچھے مائک دے دیں ان کو. یہ میں اسٹوڈنٹس کے لیے کچھ زیادہ اس لیے وہ اصرار کر رہا ہوں کہ ایسی اپرچونیٹیز ذرا کم ملتی ہیں اسٹوڈنٹس کو. جی
السلام علیکم. مائی کوشچن از دیٹ as a newborn country Pakistan, there were internal problem in the country. How difficult it was for JINNAH to manage it and to recognize the country in foreign countries like UNO, Russia, to represent Pakistan, which problems he faced in managing internal problem and to face external problems.
صحیح.
جی آئی تھنک obviously this was a very difficult time. اور آپ کو پتہ ہے ایک ملک نے تو ہمیں ووٹ کرنے سے ہی انکار کر دیا تھا ان آر فیور ایٹ دی UN. سو اٹ واز اے ویری ڈیفیکلٹ ٹائم, اینڈ دیٹس ویئر آپ کا جنہوں نے پوچھا تھا سر ظفر اللہ خان کے بارے میں سوال, سو ہی ہیڈ ہم کم آل دا وے فرام بھوپال اینڈ ٹیک اٹ اوور, بیکاز UNO میں جو اپلیکیشن تھی اٹ واز سچ اے ٹچ اینڈ گو میٹر کہ اٹ واز سم ون آف دیٹ اسٹیچر ہو از نیڈیڈ. تو یہ ہوا, اور اس کے علاوہ جو آپ انٹرنل ڈیفیکلٹیز تو بہت زیادہ تھی, جس میں سب سے بڑا تو تھا ریفیوجی کرائسس. اور ریفیوجی کرائسس آپ کے سامنے ہے کہ دیٹ واز کہ کہاں اتنے زیادہ, کیونکہ الٹیمیٹ ایونچولی جو آئیڈیا تھا جو پاکستان کا جو تھا وہ یہ تھا کہ ایکسچینج آف پاپولیشنز ناٹ نیسسرلی ہوں گی نہیں, کیونکہ وہ آئیڈیا یہ تھا کہ پاکستان میں جتنے لوگ بستے ہیں وہ پاکستانی ہیں, اور انڈیا میں جتنے لوگ بستے ہیں یا ہندوستان میں جتنے, یہ بڑا امپورٹنٹ ڈسٹنکشن ہے. قائد اعظم ہندوستان کہتے تھے, انڈیا نہیں کہتے تھے. انڈیا وہ تمام پاکستان اور ہندوستان کو ٹگیدر کہتے تھے. خیر, ہندوستان کے اندر جو ان کے جو مسلمان بستے ہیں وہ ان کے نزدیک ہندوستانی تھے, اور پاکستان میں جو غیر مسلم بستے تھے وہ پاکستانی تھے. تو یہ اوریجنل تھا. لیکن یہ ایشو تب مسئلہ چینج ہوا, یا جب یہ اس کے اندر ایشو کریٹ ہوا, جب یہاں خاص کر پنجاب کے اندر آپ نے دیکھا کہ دونوں سائڈ پہ ایک ہول سیل بچری ہوئی. تو جب وہ بچری سٹارٹ ہوئی उसके बाद जो है हालात इस तरह के क्रिएट हुए कि हर तरफ से लोग जो हैं वो यहाँ से भी वहाँ गए और वहाँ से भी यहाँ आए, तो वो रेफ्यूजी क्राइसिस जो था, आई थिंक द वन ऑफ द लार्जेस्ट इंटरनली डिस्प्लेस्ड पॉपुलेशंस थी, और ऑब्वियसली forced migration थी, it was because of the conditions. So I think that was the biggest crisis that Jinnah faced.
Other question? जी माइक इधर दे दें प्लीज़.
Can I ask a question?
इनके बात कर लीजिएगा. इधर दे दें.
If the British left India before Pakistan became independent, do you think we would still have Pakistan today, or would it be India?
I think that's, of course, that's a what if. What if they'd done that? I think that ultimately Pakistan might have been created if there wasn't enough, because India could have stayed united if there were enough safeguards. Remember, Jinnah actually had accepted the cabinet mission plan in 1946, which would have kept India united. So I think that as long as there would be safeguards, yes, India could have stayed united, but those safeguards were not on the offing. They were, as far as the Congress was concerned, it was my way or the highway for them. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, no doubt a great leader, but was very sort of myopic about the fact that he wanted a centralized polity. I think that mad dash for centralized polity was something that would have ultimately led Pakistan to separate, or the Pakistan regions to separate from India.
उधर को यस किसने हाथ उठाया? आपने उठाया था पहले. उधर माइक दे दें, फिर आगे ले आइएगा.
So just a brief question and a bit similar question the way asked before. I just want to ask that you mentioned that Qaid-e-Azam before Pakistan, after Pakistan became independent, I think he was convinced later that Pakistan should be made, because many of his colleagues were convinced that Pakistan should be made, but he was, I think he was convinced later in his life. I think in 1940 in Pakistan resolution, just like many of his colleagues, just like I think Allama Iqbal, I think he in his 1930s speech, he said that there should be a separate state, Muslim state. But I think till 1940, Qaid-e-Azam, many years after 10 years, he said that Pakistan should be an independent, should be an independent state or Muslim state. So how do you see this?
Well, I think I think you were little slightly, your volume was slightly low, but as far as I could understand the question, I think there was first of all, there was a dichotomy there. The Iqbalian idea of Pakistan was slightly different from Jinnah's idea, and there was also Rahmat Ali in the mix. For Jinnah, 1940 represented a departure from his initial sort of idea of a united India. He was no longer working towards this idea that somehow there would be what is known as, what I'd like to call, which is a political science concept called consociationalism. That is where divided societies are brought together by consensus. That consensus was something that Jinnah had worked for all his life. That consensus was no longer on the table. And that is when 1940 happened. So for Jinnah to take it up, his motivations were entirely different from those of Allama Iqbal. Allama Iqbal actually looked towards a future where the law of Islam and the idea of Islam could be used and properly implemented, and that was his idea. That was something in terms of modernization of Islam. So he was talking about ijtihad and that sort of thing. So he wanted a state where those ideas could then be experimented upon. Jinnah, I think, was slightly different. His idea was more of a I don't want to use the word, it's kind of fashionable to say bargaining counter, but that is what it was.
Okay, now چلیں اس طرف سے کسی نے نہیں پوچھا. You just asked one question. You and behind you. ٹھیک ہے جلدی سے. Where's the mic? پلیز اب پہلے انہیں دے دینا, یہ پھر اسی میں ٹائم ضائع ہو جائے گا. Give it to him.
ہیلو سر, السلام علیکم. سر سید احمد خان نے جو 2 نیشن تھیوری دی تھی اس میں قائد اعظم کا رایا کیا تھا؟
کیا چیز اس میں؟
قائد اعظم کا رایا کیا تھا؟
آج جی
قائد اعظم تھے اس وقت؟
اس کے بعد بھی قائد اعظم کا رایا تو ہونا چاہیے تھا نا.
دیکھیے اس میں بالکل جو ان کی رائے تھی وہ یہ تھی کہ پہلے تو اس کے حق میں نہیں تھے, جب تک وہ کانگریس میں رہے اس حق میں نہیں تھے, لیکن 2 نیشن تھیوری کو الٹیمیٹلی انہوں نے اڈاپٹ جو کیا ہے وہ سر سید کے جو اوریجنل آئیڈیاز تھے اس تک بہت ان کے قریب آ گئے تھے 1940 تک, لیکن 1916 میں جو لکھنؤ پیکٹ تھا یا اس کے بعد تھا اس وقت تک آپ یہ کہہ سکتے ہیں کہ سر سید احمد خان کے آئیڈیاز جنرلی انفارم کر رہے تھے مسلم کمیونٹی کو, بٹ جناح صاحب شاید خود اس سے کنونس نہیں تھے اس ٹائم تک.
صحیح, ادھر مائک دے دیں, ادھر لے جائیں آپ. اسٹینڈ اپ, یو اسٹینڈ اپ پلیز. یا
Assalamu alaikum. My question relates to the Unionist Party and its relationship with Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
مائک کو کلوز کریں.
My question relates to Muhammad Ali Jinnah and his relationship with the Unionist Party. How was he able to generate a deal with them, which was such a bastion in Punjab?
Okay, so you're talking about the Sikandar Jinnah Pact, are you? Yeah, so Sikandar Jinnah Pact, I think, was an interesting situation where the Punjabi Muslims or the Unionist Party needed sort of a protective cover at the center, and Muslim League needed a local party that would kind of adopt its flag. So this was a marriage of convenience, as it were, between the Muslim League and the Unionist Party. That is how the Sikandar Jinnah Pact came about, and obviously it was a very successful political move, because otherwise Jinnah would not have gotten the support that he needed from Punjab.
اوکے, ایک بالکل آپ کے پیچھے جو کھڑے, ادھر کون ہے؟ اچھا کریے, اب آپ کیمرہ کے پیچھے تھی, میں نے دیکھا نہیں آپ کو.
میرا سوال یہ ہے کہ 11 اگست 1947 کو برٹش کی جانب سے سب سے پہلے بلوچستان کو آزادی کے کاغذات ڈاکومنٹس پر سائن کیے گئے. اس کے بعد 14 اگست 1947 کو پاکستان آزاد ہوا, اور پھر دوبارہ بلوچستان پر خان آف کلات پر رات کے 4 بجے فوج کشی کر کے زبردستی خان کے دستخط لیے گئے. جیسے آپ کی ریسرچ کے مطابق ہے کہ قائد اعظم ایک روشن خیال انسان تھے, اس تمام روشن خیالی میں جو بلوچستان پر مسلط کیا گیا اس بارے میں آپ کیا کہتے ہیں؟
دیکھیے اس کے بارے میں تو جہاں تک میری رائے ہے وہ آپ سے بالکل مختلف ہے, کیونکہ کچھ جو حقائق میں نے پڑھے ہیں وہ شاید جو میں نے چیزیں پڑھی ہیں وہ آپ سے ڈیفرنٹ ہوں. میں یہ جو آپ کا جس اینگل سے آپ اس کو دیکھ رہی ہیں اس اینگل آف ویژن سے میں اگری نہیں کرتا. اس کی وجہ یہ ہے کہ سب کانٹیننٹ میں 532 ریاستیں تھیں, ٹھیک ہے, جس میں بہت بڑی بڑی ریاستیں بھی تھیں جیسے کہ کشمیر تھا, حیدرآباد تھا, اور اس کے علاوہ اور بھی ریاستیں تھیں, بھوپال تھا. قلات ایکچولی ایک نسبتاً چھوٹی ریاست تھی, ٹھیک ہے, اور کسی ایک پرنسلی اسٹیٹ کو سب کانٹیننٹ کے اندر یہ اجازت نہ انڈیا نے دی نہ پاکستان نے دی, اور خاص کر انڈیا نے تو بالکل بھی نہیں دی کہ وہ اپنا یہ ڈیسائیڈ کرے کہ ہم جو ہے آزاد ہو جائیں گے. اگر آزادی کا کسی کو ہوتا حق تو وہ حیدرآباد کو ہوتا, جو کہ فرانس اور بیلجیم سے بڑا ملک تھا اپنی جگہ پہ. تو پہلی بات تو یہ کہ قلات کا کوئی ایگزیکٹلی وہ انڈیپینڈنس کا جو آپ کہہ رہی ہیں ان کا کوئی اس کا کوئی ریزن نہیں تھی, کوئی اس کی لاجیکل جسٹیفیکیشن نہیں تھی. اچھا, جہاں تک آپ کہہ رہی ہیں فوج کشی, اگین فیکٹس اس کے مختلف ہیں. آئی نو کہ یہ بڑا اسے کہہ سکتے ہیں آپ کہ بڑا فیشنیبل ہے آج کل اس کاز کو اٹھانا. لیکن جہاں تک بلوچستان کا اپنا تعلق ہے, یہ بڑا کلیئر تھا. کلات خان آف کلات نے خود یہ کہا ہے بعد میں ایک جگہ پہ کہ ان کو مس لیڈ کیا گیا تھا, نہیں تو وہ چاہتے تھے, اور انہوں نے یہ اسٹینڈ سل اگریمنٹ سائن کیا ہوا تھا پاکستان کے ساتھ. تو یہ سوال ہی نہیں پیدا ہوتا تھا کہ کلات جو کہ درمیان میں جس کا ایک وہ پڑ رہا ہے کہ وہ ایک آزاد ملک بنتا. وہ اسی طرح تھا کہ اگر کسی نے آزاد ملک بننا ہوتا تو وہ حیدرآباد بنتا یا کشمیر بنتا. کلات تو نسبتاً چھوٹی تھی, اور کلات کے 2 حصے تھے. لسبیلا فار ایگزامپل ہیڈ گون انڈیپینڈنٹ اینڈ ڈکلیئرڈ ان فیور آف پاکستان پہلے سے, تو اس کی پرنسپیلٹیز آگے جو تھیں وہ اگری نہیں کر رہی تھی. تو یہ آئی تھنک یہ آئی کین انڈرسٹینڈ وائی دیر واز سچ اپلوز فار یور کویشچن, بٹ آئی تھنک کہ ون ہیز ٹو بی مور ریئلسٹک اینڈ پریگمیٹک اینڈ practical about the possibilities that were there, and there was no possibility of any princely state going their way.
Right. Now we are to close this session.
Hello.
بہت سوال بھی ہوئے, اور ظاہر ہے بہت سارے. کون یہ ہیلو کر رہا ہے بھائی؟ آپ کبھی تو اسے کلوز کرنے دیں گے کہ نہیں؟ سوری کیا چیز؟ دیکھیے آپ کا لاسٹ کویشچن ہوگا تو ان کا بھی لاسٹ کویشچن ہوگا, سو ویل ہیو ٹو فالو سم ڈسپلن. آئی ایم سوری فار دس. تھوڑا سا مجھے ٹیچر ہونے کا فائدہ دے دیں. اور آئی تھینک مسٹر یاسر فار کمنگ آل دا وے فرام اسلام آباد اینڈ پریزنٹنگ a good sort of introduction of his book. And I thank the audience, the senior people as well as the students for being so passionate about asking the questions. Thank you very much. The book is available on the stall of the Lightstone, اور I think اس کے اوپر کوئی ڈسکاؤنٹ بھی ہے. So you people do get its copy. Okay.
Yasser Latif Hamdani ki kitab Jinnah Alive is available at the Lightstone stall, which is book stalls ke paas hai. So if you want to buy the book, the author, we would request him to, be near the Lightstone stall, and he can sign the book if he agrees. Thank you. Okay.